The ranging party found them 3 days north of the wall, where the trees grow thick, and the snow never fully melts, even in summer. 12 brothers of the Night's Watch, mounted on shaggy garrons, following smoke on the wind. They expected wildling raiders. What they found was a camp of the dead. The tents still stood, black against the white. The fires had gone cold. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some with arrows in them, others with the brutal wounds that speak of close combat, with axes and spears. The Night's Watch had not done this. Some other clan, perhaps, or arranging from farther east. Beyond the wall, the free folk kill each other as readily as they kill crows. There are no laws in the wild, no king's justice, only strength and cunning and the hard mercy of winter. The ranger who led the party was named Jeremy Woodbear, a hard man from the Shadow Tower. He walked among the corpses with his sword drawn, checking each one. His brothers did the same, overturning bodies, looking for survivors or threats. They found neither. Just the frozen dead, their blood dark against the snow, their eyes staring at nothing. Then one of the younger rangers called out. He had found something in the largest tent. Not a survivor, not exactly. A child. The boy could not have been more than 6 or 7 years. He sat among the furs and blankets, silent, his eyes wide but tearless. Around him lay 2 bodies, a woman and a man, both dead for at least a day. The woman's hand still reached towards the child, as if even in death she had tried to protect him. The boy looked up at the ranger and said nothing. He did not cry. He did not run. He simply watched with eyes that had already seen too much. Jeremy Woodbear stood at the entrance to the tent, looking down at the child. The law was simple. Wildlings were enemies of the realm. Any who crossed the wall without leave were to be killed or driven back. But the law said nothing about children too young to hold a weapon, too small to be a threat. The ranger looked at the boy and saw not a wildling raider, but an orphan, a victim of the same violence that plagued all the lands beyond the wall. He made his decision. They would take the boy back to Castle Black. The Night's Watch had no shortage of orphans in its ranks. What was one more? They wrapped the child in a heavy cloak, black wool that swallowed his small frame. He did not resist. He let them lift him onto a horse, let them tie him gently so he would not fall. As they rode away from the camp, the boy looked back only once. His mother lay in that tent, and his father, and whatever life he had known before this moment. The rangers set fire to the camp as they left, as was their custom. Better to burn the dead than leave them for the crows, or worse things. The ride to the wall took 2 days. The child did not speak. He ate what they gave him, drank when they offered water, but he said nothing. Some of the rangers tried to coax words from him, asking his name, where his clan had come from, what had happened. The boy only stared at them with those dark eyes. Jeremy Woodbear told the others to leave him be. Grief has its own language, and silence is part of it. When they reached the wall, the boy looked up at it for the first time. It rose above him like a cliff of ice, blue-white and impossibly tall, stretching away to the east and west as far as the eye could see. The wall is 700 feet high, the maesters say, and the sight of it strikes all who see it with awe or terror or both. The child tilted his head back, following the wall up and up until his neck ached. He had heard stories of it, perhaps, around his mother's fire. All worldlings know of the wall, but stories cannot prepare you for the thing itself, the vast cold weight of it, the way it makes you feel small and trapped all at once. The great gate groaned open, and the rangers rode through into Castle Black. The courtyard was busy with the work of the watch. Men in black moved between buildings, carrying wood, sharpening weapons, tending horses. The sound of hammers rang from the forge. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the common hall. The boy looked around at it all, this place that would become his home, his prison, his world. The Lord Commander in those days was a man named Corgyle, a Dornishman who had taken the Black after killing his brother in a duel over a woman. He was a stern man, but not a cruel one. When Jeremy Woodbear brought the boy to him, Corgal looked the child over with an expression that might have been pity or might have been irritation. It was hard to tell with Corgil. "A wildling whelp," the Lord Commander said. "And you brought him here why, exactly?" "He's a child, my lord," Jeremy said. "Too young to kill, too young to send back north alone." "Too young to be useful, you mean?" Corgyle walked around the boy, examining him like a horse at market. "Does he speak the common tongue?" "He hasn't spoken at all, my lord, not since we found him." Corgyle grunted. "Shock, most likely. Or he's simple. Either way, we're stuck with him now." He looked down at the boy. "What's your name, child?" The boy said nothing. "Your name," Corgyle repeated, slower and louder, as if volume would break through the silence. Still nothing. The Lord Commander sighed. "Fine. He's got no name we know, so we'll give him one. The free folk love their raiders and rattleshirts and such. We'll call him Rayder until he tells us otherwise. Send him to the stewards, let him earn his bread sweeping floors and hauling water. When he's old enough, if he's got any sense, we'll train him properly." And so the boy became Mance, though no one called him that yet. Just Rayder, or boy, or wildling brat, when the other children wanted to be cruel. He was given a bed in the barracks, where the stewards kept the young ones, the orphans and the sons of criminals, and the boys whose fathers had brought them to the wall, because they had no other use for them. The Night's Watch takes all kinds, and it raises them all the same, in cold and discipline, and the knowledge that they will spend their lives in service to a realm most of them will never see again. The boy learned quickly that survival meant obedience. He swept the floors as he was told. He carried water from the well until his arms ached. He mucked out the stables and scrubbed the pots in the kitchen and did all the thankless work that keeps a castle running. The other boys sometimes picked fights with him, calling him a savage, a wildling, an enemy. He learned to fight back, and he learned to lose without crying. And he learned that the stewards cared less about who started a fight than who finished it. At night, in his bed, he would remember. He remembered his mother's face, the sound of her voice singing songs in a language that was already fading from his mind. He remembered the smell of the tents, smoke and pine, and the musk of firs. He remembered the taste of meat cooked over an open fire, the way the wind sounded in the trees, the endless white landscape of the true north. He remembered being free. But memory is a painful thing when you are a child in a strange place. So slowly, carefully, he began to let it go. He learned the common tongue properly, losing the accent his mother had given him. He learned to eat the food the watch provided, heavy bread and salted meat and thin beer. He learned the names of the castles along the wall, the history of the watch, the prayers to the seven, though his mother had whispered to the old gods. He learned to be what they wanted him to be, a boy in black. A future brother of the Night's Watch. But some things he could not let go. In the quiet moments when the work was done and the other boys were gambling with dice or fighting or sleeping, he would hum the songs his mother had taught him, quietly, so no one would hear, just enough to remember that once he had been something else, someone else. The years passed. The boy grew. He learned to read under the tutelage of Meister Orton, a patient man who believed that even wildling orphans deserved education. He learned swordplay in the yard, taking his bruises alongside the other boys, developing a quickness that came from being smaller and having something to prove. He learned to climb a skill that came naturally to him, as if his body remembered the cliffs and trees of his early childhood. The Master-at-Arms noticed this and began training him more seriously. A ranger needs to climb, after all. The wall does not scale itself. By the time the boy was 12, he could read and write as well as many high-born children. He could fight with sword and spear and a knife. He could track a deer through snow and find north by the stars and survive a night in the cold with nothing but flint and steel. The masters began to speak of him not as the wildling orphan, but as a promising recruit. He had found his place. It seemed he would make a fine ranger when he came of age. But inside, in the parts of himself he never showed to anyone, the boy remembered the wind. He remembered the freedom of the wild, the days when there were no walls and no masters and no vows to tie him down. He stood sometimes at the top of the wall during his duties, looking north, and he felt something pull at him, a longing, a grief for something lost that he could barely name. He did not speak of this to anyone. Speaking of such things would mark him as unreliable, disloyal, dangerous. The Night's Watch does not tolerate men who look north with longing. They want men who look north with hatred or duty or grim determination. So the boy kept his silence, as he had kept it since the day they found him in that tent among the dead. On his 16th name day, or what they guessed was his 16th name day. The boy stood in the sept at Castle Black and spoke the words. He took the black. He swore the oath that would bind him for the rest of his life. The words came easily enough. He had heard them 1,000 times, practiced them, knew them by heart. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch for this night and all the nights to come. The words were beautiful, noble, full of purpose and meaning, and as he spoke them, the boy who had been called Rayder felt them settle over him like chains. But he smiled when the other brothers clapped him on the back. He accepted their congratulations. He put on the black cloak they gave him, heavier and finer than the one he had worn as a steward. He became Mance Rayder, Ranger of the Night's Watch, Defender of the Realm, Servant of the Wall. That night, alone in his bunk, he hummed one of his mother's songs, so quietly that even he could barely hear it, a song about the wind and the stars and the wide free world beyond all walls, a song he would never forget, no matter how many years he wore the black, a song that would one day call him home. Mance Rayder became a ranger in the spring of his 17th year. The Lord Commander assigned him to the patrols that ranged a few miles north of the wall. Easy duty for a new brother, meant to teach him the work without undue risk. He rode out with veterans who knew the land, men who had spent decades watching the wilderness for threats that might never come. They taught him to read tracks in the snow, to smell smoke on the wind, to know when silence meant safety and when it meant danger. The first time he crossed through the wall as a sworn brother, Mance felt something shift inside him. As a child, he had been carried south through the gate, wrapped in a cloak, barely conscious of what was happening. Now he rode north willingly, wearing black, carrying a sword, part of the very force that had taken him from his home. The irony was not lost on him, but he kept his face carefully neutral. Rangers do not brood. They watch and they ride, and they return to report what they have seen. His early rangings were uneventful. They found abandoned wildling camps, old fire pits, tracks that led nowhere important. Once they came upon a clan moving east, 20 or 30 people, with their tents and dogs and children. The ranger leading the patrol, a grizzled man named Dalbridge, watched them from a distance and let them go. They were moving parallel to the wall, not toward it. No threat, no reason to engage. The Night's Watch was too few to chase down every group of free folk in the wilderness. They watched for armies, for raiders, for threats to the realm. A family moving to new hunting grounds was beneath their notice. But Mance watched them anyway. He saw the women carrying bundles on their backs, the men with spears, the children running alongside the dogs. He saw the way they moved through the snow with easy confidence, at home in a land that would kill a southerner in a day. He remembered, just for a moment, what it felt like to be one of them. Then Dalbridge called him back to his horse, and they rode on. The seasons turned. Mance rode out again and again, learning the land north of the wall with the thoroughness that separates a good ranger from a dead one. He learned where the streams ran, where the caves could shelter a man from a storm, where the trees grew thick enough to hide a camp. He learned the patterns of the free folk, the territories different clans claimed, the times of year they moved, and the reasons why. The Night's Watch kept records of all this, maps and reports going back generations, but there was no substitute for seeing it yourself, for feeling the wind on your face and knowing from the shape of the land where danger might wait. He was good at it, better than good. Mance had a gift for the work that his teachers noticed and encouraged. He could track like a hunter, fight like a soldier, and climb better than anyone else at Castle Black. The wall itself became his training ground. While other rangers groaned at the thought of scaling 700 feet of ice, Mance volunteered for the duty. He learned every handhold, every crack, every place where the ice was solid and where it was treacherous. He could climb from bottom to top in less than an hour, faster than men twice his size. The Master-at-Arms said he climbed like a wildling and meant it as a compliment. But it was his mind that set him apart as much as his body. Mance asked questions. Why did the Thens stay in the valleys while other clans roamed the forests? Why did some free folk burn their dead while others buried them? Why did they call themselves the free folk when they had chiefs and leaders just like any other people? The older rangers sometimes grew irritated with his curiosity. They had spent years beyond the wall and never wondered about such things. Wildlings were wildlings, savages who rejected the order and law of civilized lands. What more did you need to know? But few of the rangers understood what Mance was doing. He was learning the enemy, not just how to fight them, but how to understand them. And understanding the enemy, they knew, was the first step to defeating him. Among those who understood was Corin Halfhand. Corin was a legend at Castle Black, a ranger who had survived more years beyond the wall than most brothers lived in total. He had lost the fingers of his right hand in a fight with a wildling warrior. Yet, he had learned to fight with his left so skillfully that men said he was more dangerous with one hand than most men were with two. He rarely spoke, but when he did, men listened. He moved through the wilderness like smoke, silent and unseen until he wanted to be seen. Wildlings feared him. Brothers respected him. And when he chose Mance to ride with him on a long ranging, it was considered a great honour. They rode out in the late summer, a party of 8 rangers heading deep into the Frostfangs to scout for signs of massing clans. The mission was expected to last a month, maybe more. They would live off the land, avoid contact when possible, observe and report. It was dangerous work. Men died on long rangings. They fell from cliffs, froze in storms, got arrows in the dark from wildlings who moved like ghosts. But it was also the most important work the Watch did. Without rangers to scout the north, the wall was blind. Quirin led them through the mountains with a confidence that came from decades of experience. He knew where to find water, where to camp, how to move, without leaving obvious tracks. He taught by example more than words, showing Mance and the others how to survive in a land that killed careless men. At night, around small fires that they kept burning only until they had cooked their food, Corin would sometimes talk about the wildlings. "They are not monsters," Corin said one evening, his voice quiet in the darkness. "That is the first thing you must understand. They are men and women, same as us. They love their children. They fear death. They laugh and cry and bleed red when you cut them. Then why do they refuse the king's peace?" one of the younger rangers asked. "Why do they raid our lands instead of bending the knee and living under law?" Corin was quiet for a moment, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "Because they have never known a king, and they do not trust what they have never known. To them, we are the invaders. We are the ones who built a wall to keep them out of lands their ancestors hunted for thousands of years. They see themselves as free. We see them as criminals. Both sides believe they are right." Mance listened carefully. This was not the way most brothers talked about wildlings. Most spoke of them with contempt or hatred, as enemies to be killed or driven back. But Corin spoke of them with something closer to respect, or at least understanding. "Does that mean we should let them cross the wall?" another ranger asked. "Let them raid the north?" "No," Corin said simply. "Our duty is clear. We guard the realms of men. We protect the people who cannot protect themselves. But we do not need to hate the wildlings to do our duty. We only need to understand them. A man who understands his enemy is far more dangerous than a man who simply fears him." The ranging took them deep into wildling territory. They saw camps from a distance, counted numbers, noted weapons and supplies. Once they stumbled onto a meeting between 2 clans, perhaps 100 warriors gathered in a valley, and they watched from the heights for 2 days to see what would come of it. Nothing did. The clans parted peacefully, going their separate ways. It seemed to be some kind of trade gathering, not a war council. Corin recorded it all in his journal, notes that would eventually make their way to the Lord Commander's desk. On the 20th day of the ranging, they ran into trouble. A wildling hunting party spotted their tracks and followed them into the high passes. There were 6 wildlings, all men, all armed with spears and axes. The rangers outnumbered them, but fighting in the mountains was treacherous for both sides. Corin tried to lose them first, leading the rangers through narrow passes and across rock slides. But the wildlings were trackers too, and they kept coming. Finally, Corin decided to set an ambush. He positioned his men on both sides of a narrow defile and waited for the wildlings to walk through. It was a simple trap, and it worked. When the wildlings entered the pass, the rangers came down on them from both sides. Mance killed his first man in that fight, a wildling with a scarred face and a spear that he thrust at Mance's chest. Mance knocked the spear aside and drove his sword into the man's belly, feeling the blade punch through leather and flesh and come out the other side. The wildling looked at him with surprise, as if he had not expected to die today, and then he fell. Mance pulled his sword free and turned to face another attacker, but the fight was already over. 3 wildlings dead 3, running back the way they had come. The rangers did not pursue. They had what they needed. Elder wildlings would not follow them any more. That night, Mance could not sleep. He kept seeing the scarred man's face, the look of surprise as the sword went in. He had trained for years to fight, had practiced with sword and spear until the movements were as natural as breathing. But training does not prepare you for the reality of killing a man, for the weight of it, for the knowledge that someone who was alive because of your action is now dead. Corin found him sitting alone, away from the others. The older ranger sat down beside him without a word. They sat together in the darkness for a long time before Corin finally spoke. "You're first?" he asked. Mance nodded. "It never gets easier," Corin said. "Men who say it does are liars or broken. Every life you take should weigh on you. The moment it stops mattering is the moment you become the thing we fight against." "He would have killed me," Mance said, "if I hadn't killed him first." "Yes," Corin agreed, "and that is the tragedy of it. He was protecting his land as he saw it. You were doing your duty as you see it. Both of you were right, both of you were wrong, and he is dead because of it." Mance looked at the older ranger. "How do you bear it? All the years, all the men you have killed." Corin was quiet for a long moment. "I remember them," he said finally. "I do not let myself forget that they were men, not monsters, and I try to kill only when I must, not when I can. That is all any of us can do." They returned to Castle Black 4 weeks after they had left, all 8 rangers alive, their mission complete. Corin made his report to the Lord Commander. The wildling clans were quiet, no signs of massing forces, no threat to the wall in the immediate future. It was good news, the kind of news that meant the Watch could rest easy for another season. But Mance couldn't rest easy. Something had changed in him during that ranging. He'd seen the wildlings not as distant threats, but as people. He had killed a man who might have had a family, children, a woman waiting for him to come home from the hunt. He had heard Corin speak of the wildlings with understanding instead of hatred, and he had begun to wonder, just a little, about the vows he had sworn and the duty he had pledged his life to. he buried those thoughts deep. He was a brother of the Night's Watch. His doubts did not matter. His duty was clear. He would serve until he died, as he had sworn. But the thoughts were there, like seeds planted in dark soil, waiting for the right conditions to grow. The seasons turned again. Mance rode out on more rangings. He fought wildlings when he had to, avoided them when he could, and always he watched and learned. He learned their language, picking up words and phrases from the few prisoners the watch took, from the traders who sometimes came to the wall with furs and amber. He learned their customs, their stories, the names of their gods and heroes. And slowly, carefully, he began to see them not as enemies, but as people caught on the wrong side of a wall they had never asked for. But he said nothing of this to his brothers. He kept his face neutral, his doubts private. He was Mance Rayder, Ranger of the Night's Watch, and as far as anyone could tell, he was exactly the brother he was supposed to be, loyal, dutiful, unquestioning. Inside, the seeds of doubt continued to grow, but no one could see them yet. Not even Mance himself knew how tall they would eventually become. The years passed, and Mance Rayder became one of the most capable rangers at Castle Black. By his mid-20s, he had ridden beyond the wall, more times than he could count, seen more of the true north than most brothers would see in a lifetime. The Master at Arms spoke of him with approval. The Lord Commander trusted him with difficult assignments. The younger rangers looked up to him, wanting to learn his skills, to climb as he climbed, to track as he tracked. But something was changing in Mance that no one else could see. With each ranging, with each encounter with the free folk, the wall inside his mind grew thinner. The wall that separated us from them, civilized from savage, right from wrong. He had killed wildlings in battle, fought them hand to hand in the snow and the rocks. But he had also shared fires with them, traded songs for safe passage, learned their tongues and their customs. And the more he learned, the harder it became to see them as the enemy. The Watch did not encourage such thinking. To them, the free folk were raiders and thieves, criminals who refused the king's law and made the north dangerous for honest people. Every ranging began with the same instructions: observe, avoid contact when possible, engage only when necessary, kill if threatened. The wildlings were obstacles at best, threats at worst. They were never people to be understood. Mance understood them anyway. He began to spend longer periods beyond the wall, volunteering for the extended rangings that other brothers tried to avoid. Weeks at a time in the wilderness, living off the land, moving from place to place with only a few companions. These long rangings took him deep into wildling territory, places where the free folk had lived for generations without ever seeing a man in black. He learned the safe routes and the dangerous ones, the valleys where clans gathered, and the empty lands where even wildlings did not go. It was during one of these rangings that Mance first encountered the Thenns. They lived in the high valleys of the Frostfangs, a disciplined people who dressed in bronze and followed strict laws under their lord, whom they called the Magnar. The Thenns were different from other worldlings. They did not raid, they did not wander. They stayed in their valleys, farming the thin soil, raising sheep, living in stone houses that had stood for centuries. Some said they had giant blood in them. Others said they were the last remnant of the first men, unchanged since before the wall was built. Mance and 2 other rangers stumbled upon a Then village while tracking what they thought was a raiding party. It was not a raiding party. It was a hunting party, returning with deer and mountain goats. The Thens saw the rangers before the rangers saw them, and suddenly Mance and his companions were surrounded by bronze-clad warriors with spears. The Thens did not attack immediately. Their leader, a hard-faced man with ritual scars on his cheeks, studied the rangers with cold eyes. He spoke in the old tongue, harsh and guttural. Mance understood enough to know they were being questioned. Who were they? Why were they in Then lands? Were they scouts for a larger force? The other rangers reached for their weapons, but Mance stopped them. He had learned enough of the old tongue to make himself understood, picking up words and phrases from other wildlings over the years. He spoke slowly, carefully, explaining that they were ranging, that they meant no harm, that they would leave Then lands and not return. The scarred leader listened. Then he did something unexpected. He invited them to the village. It was a test, Mance realized later. The Thens wanted to see if these crows would honor guest right, if they would accept bread and salt and keep the peace. The other rangers were nervous, certain it was a trap, but Mance convinced them to accept. Refusing would be an insult, and insults led to bloodshed. Better to accept and be watchful. They spent the night in the Then village. They were given food, simple fare, but warm and filling. They were watched constantly, warriors standing guard at every door and gate. But they were not harmed. The scarred leader, whose name was Halleck, sat with them and spoke through Mance, asking questions about the lands south of the wall, about the Night's Watch, about the kings who ruled the 7 kingdoms. Mance answered carefully, giving information that was common knowledge, nothing that could endanger the Watch. But he asked questions too. He wanted to know about the Thens, their history, their ways. Halleck seemed surprised by this. Crows did not usually ask questions. They came north to hunt wildlings, not to talk with them. "You are different from other crows," Halleck said, through the broken phrases of the old tongue and the few words of common he knew. "You want to understand. Why?" Mance thought about how to answer. "Because you are my enemy," he said finally, "and a man should understand his enemy." Halleck smiled at that, a cold smile, but not without respect. "That is wise. Most of your brothers see only savages. They do not see people." "Are you people?" Mance asked. "Or are you the enemy of all who live south of the wall?" "We are people who want to be left alone," Halleck said. "We do not raid your lands. We do not trouble your kneelers. We live as our fathers lived, and their fathers before them. The wall means nothing to us. It is your wall, not ours, built by your people to keep us out of lands that were ours first." It was an argument Mance had heard before, but never stated so plainly. The wall had been built 8,000 years ago, or so the histories claimed. But the free folk had lived in the north long before that. From their perspective, the wall was an invasion, a barrier erected by southern kings to claim lands that had never been theirs to claim. The rangers left the next morning, unharmed, richer in knowledge, if nothing else. The other brothers reported the encounter to the Lord Commander, noting the location of the Then village and the number of warriors they had seen. It was routine intelligence gathering, but for Mance it was something more. It was proof that the wildlings weren't all raiders and thieves. Some of them simply wanted to be left alone, to live their lives in the only way they knew. After that, Mance began to seek out contact with wildlings rather than avoid it. Not combat, but conversation. He would approach their camps under signs of peace, offering to trade information or goods. Most times they drove him off with curses and thrown stones, but sometimes they talked, and when they talked, Mance listened. He met the cave dwellers who lived in the great caverns beneath the frost fangs, pale people who rarely saw the sun and spoke in whispers. He met the raiders from the frozen shore, hard men who wore walrus hide armor and sailed skin boats across icy waters. He met the hunters who followed the great elk herds, living in tents that could be packed and moved in an hour. He met the Ice River clans who filed their teeth to points and painted their faces white. Each clan had its own customs, its own stories, its own reasons for living beyond the wall. And each clan had the same complaint. The Kneelers had taken the best lands, the forests and rivers and plains south of the wall. They had built their castles and their kingdoms and declared that everything belonged to their king. The free folk had been pushed north into the coldest, hardest lands and told they were criminals for refusing to submit to kings they had never chosen. Mance began to see the wall differently, not as a defense against savages, but as a border in a war that had never really ended. A war between people who wanted to rule and people who wanted to be free. He shared none of this with his brothers. He knew how it would sound. Sympathizing with wildlings was dangerous. It marked you as unreliable, possibly disloyal. Men had been sent to the wall for less. So Mance kept his thoughts to himself and continued to do his duty. He rode out on rangings. He fought when he had to. He killed when necessary. But all the while, the doubt grew. Corin Halfhand saw it, of course. Corin saw everything. They rode together often, the legendary ranger and his most promising student, and Corin watched Mance with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. One night, camped in a cave during a storm, Corin finally spoke of it. "You are learning too much," Corin said quietly. Mance looked up from the fire. Is there such a thing as learning too much? For a ranger of the Night's Watch, yes. Corin poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Knowledge is useful. Understanding is dangerous. I do not follow. You understand the wildlings now. You see them as people, not enemies. You hear their grievances and find them reasonable. That understanding will make you hesitate when you should act. It will make you question when you should obey. Mance was quiet for a moment. You speak as if understanding them is a betrayal of our vows. Not a betrayal, Corin said, but a complication. Our duty is to guard the realms of men, not to judge whether the wall is just or unjust, not to decide if the wildlings have legitimate complaints. Our duty is to keep them on their side of the wall and protect the people on our side. That is all. And if our duty is wrong? Corin looked at him then, really looked at him, and Mance saw something in the older ranger's eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, something else. Understanding, perhaps, or pity. Then we do our duty anyway, Corin said, because we swore an oath, because the people south of the wall depend on us, because if we do not hold the wall, no one will. Even if it means killing people who have done us no wrong. Even then, Corin set down his stick and met Mance's gaze directly. I know what you are feeling. I have felt it myself. Every ranger who spends enough time beyond the wall begins to see the wildlings as human, but we cannot let that stop us from doing what must be done. The world is not fair, Mance. It never has been. We do not serve fairness. We serve the realm." Mance wanted to argue, to push back against the resignation in Corin's voice. But he did not, because he knew Corin was right, in a way. They had sworn oaths. They had duties. And those duties did not change just because the world was more complicated than they had believed when they first put on the black. But the conversation haunted Mance. It forced him to confront what he had been avoiding. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to guard the realms of men against the wildlings. But he no longer saw the wildlings as the enemy. He saw them as people caught on the wrong side of a wall, trying to survive in a hard land, refusing to kneel to distant kings who cared nothing for them. And he understood them, not just their language or their customs, but their reasons, their anger, their pride, their fierce love of freedom. That understanding was growing into something more, something that terrified him when he let himself think about it. He was beginning to wonder if they were right, if the wall was the problem, not the solution, if the real enemy was not the free folk, but the system that divided people into kneelers and savages, worthy and unworthy, civilized and wild. These were dangerous thoughts, the kind of thoughts that could lead a man to break his vows. Mance pushed them down, buried them deep. He focused on his duty, on the rangings, on the work that needed to be done. He told himself that doubt was natural, that every man questioned his choices sometimes, that it did not mean anything. But late at night, when he was alone with his thoughts, he would remember the wildling woman who had mended his torn cloak with scarlet silk. He would remember the Thens who had shown him hospitality when they could have killed him. He would remember the songs his mother had sung, the songs he still hummed when no one was listening. And he would look north from the top of the wall toward the vast wilderness beyond and feel something pulling at him, a longing for something he could not name, a grief for a life he had never really lived. He did not know it yet, but the wall inside his mind was cracking, and soon something would happen that would shatter it completely. The ranging that changed everything began in early autumn, when the leaves in the haunted forest turned red and gold, and the first cold winds blew down from the far north. Mance was 32 years old, a veteran ranger with more experience beyond the wall than most of the brothers at Castle Black. He had been chosen to lead a small party, just 4 men on a routine patrol along the Milkwater. They were to scout for signs of wildling movement, check the river crossings, and return within a fortnight. It should have been simple. Mance had led dozens of such rangings. But the North is never truly safe, and simple tasks have a way of becoming complicated when you venture beyond the wall. They found what they were looking for on the 5th day, tracks along the riverbank, perhaps 20 people, moving west. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day old. Mance studied them carefully, reading the story they told. Families, not raiders. There were small footprints among the large ones, children, and the gait was steady, not hurried. They were migrating, not fleeing. The rangers followed the tracks, keeping a safe distance. By nightfall they had spotted the wildling camp, a cluster of hide tents near a bend in the river. Smoke rose from their fires, dogs barked, children's voices carried on the wind. Mance counted the people carefully. 18 adults, 7 children. No warriors in bronze or professional raiders, just a clan moving to new hunting grounds, as wildlings had done for thousands of years. They should have observed and moved on. That was the protocol. But one of the younger rangers, a man named Kedge, wanted to take a closer look. He convinced the others that they should circle the camp, get a better count, see if there were weapons or supplies that might indicate a larger group nearby. It was a reasonable suggestion. Mance agreed. They moved carefully through the trees, staying downwind of the dogs, circling wide around the camp. That was when it happened. Kedge stepped on loose scree, and it gave way beneath him. He fell, sliding down a rocky slope with a clatter that echoed through the quiet forest. He was not badly hurt, but the noise was enough. The dogs began barking furiously. Men shouted in the camp. Warriors grabbed spears and came running toward the sound. The rangers scattered, running through the forest in different directions, as they had been trained to do. Divide and confuse, make it harder for pursuers to follow. Mance ran east, moving quickly through the trees, using every trick he knew to lose any trackers. He could hear the wildlings behind him, crashing through the undergrowth, calling to each other in the old tongue. He ran for an hour, maybe more, until he was certain he had lost them. Then he slowed, catching his breath, listening for sounds of pursuit. Nothing. The forest was quiet again. He had escaped, but he was alone, separated from his brothers, deep in wildling territory. And when he looked down at himself, he saw the problem. His cloak had been torn badly, caught on branches during his flight. The heavy wool was ripped from his shouldered hem, hanging in tatters. His spare cloak was with his horse, and his horse was back at their camp, miles to the south. The temperature was dropping. Night was coming. Without a cloak, he would freeze before morning. He needed shelter, fire, and something to cover himself with. He needed help. And the only help available was the very people he had been running from. Mance moved carefully through the forest, circling back toward the wildling camp. He had to time this perfectly. Go too soon, and they would still be angry, ready to kill any crow they found. Wait too long, and he would freeze in the dark. He watched from the trees as the wildlings returned to their camp, talking among themselves, clearly frustrated that they had found nothing. They had been frightened by the noise, not angry. That was good. Frightened people could be reasoned with. As darkness fell and the camp settled down for the night, Mance approached openly, his hands empty and visible, his torn cloak hanging from his shoulders. He called out in the old tongue, the words awkward in his mouth but clear enough. He meant no harm. He needed help. He would trade for it. The wildlings came out of their tents with weapons ready. Mance stood still, letting them see that he was alone and unarmed. An older man, clearly the leader, approached with a spear levelled at Mance's chest. He spoke rapidly in the old tongue, too fast for Mance to follow all of it, but the meaning was clear. Why should they help a crow? Why should they not kill him where he stood? Mance answered slowly, carefully. He told them he had been separated from his brothers. He told them his cloak was torn, and he would freeze without help. He offered them information in trade, knowledge of the lands to the south, news from beyond the wall. It was a risk. Giving wildlings information could be considered treason, but the alternative was death, and dead men keep no vows. The wildlings argued among themselves. Some wanted to kill him. Some wanted to rob him and leave him to freeze. But one voice rose above the others. A woman's voice. She pushed through the crowd, a tall woman with dark hair and fierce eyes. She spoke to the leader in rapid old tongue, gesturing at Mance, at the torn cloak, at the darkening sky. Mance understood only pieces of it, but he caught the word for guest right, for hospitality, for the old laws that even wildlings honoured. The woman was arguing that they should help him, not because he was a crow, but because he had come to them openly, asking for aid, and the old laws said you did not turn away a man who came in peace. The leader was not convinced, but the woman was relentless. Finally, grudgingly, he agreed. Mance could stay the night. They would give him food and shelter from the cold. But in the morning he would leave and never return to this part of the forest. If they saw him again, they would kill him. Mance agreed. It was a better bargain than he had any right to expect. They gave him a place by one of the fires, far enough from the main camp that he could not hear their private conversations, close enough that he would not freeze. They brought him dried meat and hard bread and water from the river. The woman who had argued for him brought her sewing kit and examined his torn cloak. "This is ruined," she said in halting common tongue. "Cannot fix." "I know," Mance said, "but anything would help, even if you could patch the worst of it." She looked at the cloak, then at him, then at the sewing kit in her hands. She pulled out a piece of fabric, bright scarlet silk, clearly precious to her. It must have come from a trader, or been taken in a raid, or passed down through her family. Silk was rare beyond the wall, valuable, and she was offering to use it to patch a crow's cloak. "Why?" Mance asked. "Why help me at all? Your people and mine have been enemies for as long as anyone remembers." The woman was quiet for a moment, threading her needle by firelight. "You came to us asking for help. You could have stolen. You could have tried to kill us in the night and take what you needed. But you came asking. That means something. It means I am practical. 4 of you would have killed me before I got 10 steps. It means you see us as people," the woman said. "Not as enemies, not as things to be killed or driven away, as people who might help you if you asked." She began sewing the scarlet silk onto his torn cloak, her stitches quick and sure. "Most crows do not see us that way." Mance watched her work. The scarlet silk stood out sharply against the black wool, bright and beautiful, and completely wrong for a ranger of the Night's Watch. But it was warm. It would keep him alive, and that was what mattered. They talked as she worked, switching between the old tongue and the common tongue, each helping the other with words they did not know. She told him about her clan, about the hard winter they had survived, about why they were moving west to new hunting grounds. He told her about Castle Black, about what it was like to live at the wall, about the vows he had sworn. She asked why he had sworn them. He found he did not have a good answer. When the cloak was mended, she handed it back to him. The scarlet silk was sewn across the shoulder and down the back, a patch that covered the worst of the tears. It looked strange. No brother of the Night's Watch wore bright colours. Black was the uniform, the identity, the symbol of their order. But the patch was warm and well made, and Mance was grateful for it. "Thank you," he said. "Do not come back here," she replied. "Next time they will kill you. I will not be able to stop them." "I understand." He slept by the fire that night, wrapped in his mended cloak, warmer than he had any right to be. In the morning, The wildlings gave him food for the journey and pointed him south. They watched him go with wary eyes, making sure he left their territory. Mance walked away without looking back, the scarlet patch bright against his black cloak. It took him 2 days to find his way back to his brothers. They had been searching for him, worried that he had been killed or captured. They greeted him with relief and questions. What had happened? Where had he been? How had he survived? Mance told them the truth, or most of it. He had been separated during the flight. He had sheltered in a cave. He had survived on his own skills and returned as quickly as he could. He did not mention the wildling camp. He didn't mention the woman who had helped him. Those details would only complicate the report. But he could not hide the cloak. The scarlet silk was too bright, too obvious. The other rangers saw it immediately and asked where it had come from. Mance told them he had found it, a piece of silk left behind in an abandoned camp, and had used it to patch his torn cloak. It was a weak lie, but they seemed to accept it. Rangers did what they had to do to survive beyond the wall. If that meant using wildling silk to mend a cloak, so be it. They returned to Castle Black without further incident. Mance made his report to the Lord Commander, noting the wildling clan they had spotted and the direction it was moving. Routine information, nothing unusual. The ranging was logged as a success, despite the mishap that had separated them. And then Mance went about his duties, wearing his mended cloak, the scarlet silk bright against the black wool. He thought nothing of it at first. It was just a patch, a practical solution to a practical problem. The cloak kept him warm. That was all that mattered. But others noticed. The Maester noticed. The Master at Arms noticed. And eventually, the Lord Commander noticed. 3 weeks after his return, Mance was summoned to the Lord Commander's chambers. He went expecting a new assignment, perhaps another ranging, or some duty that needed a skilled ranger. Instead, he found the Lord Commander sitting behind his desk with a hard expression on his face. "Your cloak," the Lord Commander said without preamble. "The scarlet patch. Where did you get it?" Mance repeated the lie he had told the other rangers. Found it. Used it. Practical solution. The Lord Commander listened without expression. Then he said, "Take it off." "My lord?" "The cloak. Take it off. Get a new one from the stores. That patch is not appropriate for a brother of the Night's Watch." Mance stood very still. It was a simple order, a reasonable order. The Night's Watch wore black. Not black with scarlet patches, just black. Uniform. Identical. A symbol of their unity and purpose. But something in Mance rebelled against the order. He looked down at the scarlet silk, remembering the woman who had sewn it there, remembering her kindness, remembering the warmth it had given him when he would have frozen. And he realized that removing the patch would be like saying that kindness had never happened, that the woman's humanity did not matter, that worldlings were just enemies, not people who could show mercy to a man in need. "No," Mance said quietly. The Lord Commander looked up sharply. "What did you say?" "I said no, my lord. I will not remove it." The silence in the room was heavy. The Lord Commander stood slowly, his face darkening with anger. "You will not refuse a direct order from your Lord Commander." "It is only a patch," Mance said. "It harms no one. It doesn't interfere with my duties. It is warm and well made. There is no reason to remove it except vanity. It is not vanity It is discipline. It is uniformity. It is a symbol of who we are and what we stand for. We are the Night's Watch. We wear black, not scarlet, not gold, not any color but black. That is our tradition. That is our identity. And if I refuse, the Lord Commander's voice went cold, then you will be punished for insubordination. You will be confined to quarters. You will be stripped of your rank. And if you still refuse, you will be sent to the wall to work as a common laborer until you learn obedience. Mance stood there, his mind racing. It was such a small thing, just a patch, just a piece of silk. But it had become something larger in his mind. It had become a symbol of everything he'd been thinking about for years. The wall, the wildlings, the vows he had sworn without truly understanding what they meant. The Night's Watch demanded absolute obedience, absolute conformity. You wore black because everyone wore black. You obeyed orders because orders were given. You saw the wildlings as enemies because that was what you were told to see. There was no room for questioning, no room for independent thought, no room for the truth that Mance had learned beyond the wall, that the wildlings were people, that they had legitimate grievances, that the world was more complicated than the simple story the Watch told itself. And now they were asking him to pretend that a wildling woman's kindness had never happened, to remove the proof of it, to go back to seeing wildlings as nothing but enemies. Mance looked at the Lord Commander, and in that moment he made his decision. "Then I refuse," he said. The Lord Commander stared at him in disbelief. "You would throw away everything you have built here over a piece of cloth?" "No," Mance said. "I am throwing it away because of what that piece of cloth represents. Because you are asking me to deny the humanity of the people who helped me. Because you want me to pretend that the world is simpler than it is. Because I cannot serve an order that demands I close my eyes to the truth. The truth," the Lord Commander said slowly, "is that you have forgotten your vows. You have spent too long beyond the wall. You have let the wildlings poison your mind with their lies." "They did not lie to me," Mance said. "They showed me kindness when they could have killed me. They treated me as a human being, not as an enemy. And that is more than I can say for the order I have served all these years." The Lord Commander's hand went to the pommel of his sword. "You are dangerously close to treason, Rayder." "Then I am already there," Mance said, "because I will not remove this cloak. I will not pretend that wildlings are monsters. I will not serve an order that demands I hate people for the crime of wanting to be free." He turned and walked toward the door. "If you leave this room," the Lord Commander said, his voice shaking with rage, "you are deserting the Night's Watch. You know the penalty for desertion." Mance stopped at the door. He did know. Death. Beheading. The law was clear. Deserters were hunted down and executed. There was no mercy for men who broke their vows. But Mance had been dying slowly for years, suffocating under the weight of vows he no longer believed in. And he realized that he would rather die free than live as a prisoner to lies. "I know the penalty," Mance said, "and I accept it." He opened the door and walked out. Behind him, he heard the Lord Commander shouting for guards, calling him a deserter and a traitor. But Mance did not stop. He walked through Castle Black with purpose, gathering his few possessions, his weapons, his cloak with the scarlet patch. Other brothers saw him and called out, asking what was happening. He did not answer. He went to the stables and took a horse. he rode to the wall and climbed it one last time, scaling the ice with the skill that had made him the best climber at Castle Black. At the top, he looked south one last time at the realm he had sworn to protect, the kingdom that had never truly been his. Then he looked north at the vast wilderness, the land of the free folk, the land his mother had sung about when he was a child. And Mance Rayder, deserter of the Night's Watch, climbed down the north side of the wall and walked into the wilderness, the scarlet patch on his cloak bright against the black, a symbol of the choice he had made, and the man he was becoming. He was free, and he could never go back. The first winter beyond the wall nearly killed him. Mance had thought he knew the north, had spent years ranging through its forests and mountains, had survived storms and cold that would have killed softer men. But there is a difference between surviving as a ranger of the Night's Watch and surviving as a lone deserter with no support, no supplies, and a price on his head. The Night's Watch would be hunting him. They always hunted deserters. It was a matter of honor and discipline. Let one man break his vows and escape unpunished, and others would follow. So they would send rangers north, men who knew the land, men who knew Mance's skills and habits, men who would kill him on sight. Mance moved deep into wildling territory, beyond the places the Watch normally ranged, into the true north, where only the free folk ventured. He travelled light and fast, avoiding the trails, sleeping in caves and beneath fallen trees, hunting small game when he could, and going hungry when he could not. The scarlet patch on his cloak was too distinctive, too easy to spot from a distance. He tore it off and buried it in the snow, though doing so felt like cutting away a piece of himself. He needed to disappear. And the only way to disappear beyond the wall was to become one of the free folk. But that was easier said than done. The free folk did not trust crows, even former crows, especially former crows. How could you trust a man who had broken the most sacred oath in the north? If he had betrayed the Night's Watch, what was to stop him from betraying anyone else? Deserters were not heroes beyond the wall. They were men without honor, men who could not be trusted. Mance learned this the hard way. The first clan he approached drove him off with arrows. They did not care why he had deserted. They did not care about his reasons or his regrets. They saw a crow trying to worm his way into their camp, and they wanted no part of it. The second clan took his weapons and his food, and told him if they saw him again, they would take his life as well. He wandered through the winter, growing thinner, growing harder, learning what it truly meant to be alone. There were nights when he thought about going back, about climbing the wall and begging for mercy, about accepting whatever punishment the Watch would give him. But he knew there would be no mercy. Desertion meant death. And even if they let him live, even if they sent him to the wall, to labor until he died of cold or exhaustion, he couldn't go back to wearing the black and pretending to believe in vows that rang hollow in his heart. So he kept walking north. It was a small clan that finally took him in, 12 people living in the shadow of the Frostfangs, too poor and too weak to be picky about who they accepted. They needed every able body they could get. Their leader was an old man named Tormund, not the famous Tormund Giantsbane who would come later, but another Tormund, a hard man with white in his beard and scars across his face. He looked at Mance with suspicion, but also with pragmatism. "Can you hunt?" Tormund asked in the old tongue. Yes, Mance answered in the same language. Can you fight? Yes. Can you follow orders without asking stupid questions? Mance hesitated. That had always been his problem, even in the Watch. Asking questions, wanting to understand. But he was in no position to be difficult. Yes, he said. Then you can stay until you prove worthless or dangerous, whichever comes first. It was not exactly a warm welcome, but it was enough. Mance joined the clan, sleeping in their tents, eating their food, pulling his weight with the work that kept them alive. He hunted with the men, learning their techniques, their patience, their intimate knowledge of the land. He helped the women tan hides and smoke meat and prepare for the long winter. He learned their songs, their stories, the names of their gods and ancestors, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to accept him. Not as one of their own, not yet, but as someone who was useful, someone who earned his keep, someone who might be trusted, given time. But trust came hard beyond the wall, and Mance was still a crow in their eyes, no matter how much he tried to prove otherwise. The turning point came in his second year with the clan. Raiders from the east came in the night. A larger clan, looking to steal food and furs before the worst of winter hit. They came expecting an easy target, a small group of weaklings who would scatter at the first sign of violence. They did not expect Mance. He had been a ranger of the Night's Watch. He had been trained by the best fighters in the 7 kingdoms. He knew how to use terrain, how to set ambushes, how to turn a small force into an effective defense. When the raiders came, Mance was ready. He had positioned the clan's fighters where they could do the most damage, had set traps in the approaches to the camp, had prepared fallback positions in case they were overrun. The fight was brutal and short. 3 raiders died in the traps. 2 more fell to arrows shot from concealment. The rest retreated when they realized this was not the easy raid they had expected. The clan had lost no one, and they had captured weapons and supplies from the dead raiders. Tormund looked at Mance with new eyes after that. "You are not like other crows," the old man said. "No," Mance agreed. "I am not." "Why did you leave them?" It was the first time anyone had asked him directly. Mance thought about how to answer, how to explain in the old tongue something he barely understood himself. Finally, he said, "They wanted me to hate you. All of you. To see you as enemies, not as people. I could not do that anymore. So I left." Tormund was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That is a good reason. Better than most. You may stay as long as you wish." It wasn't quite friendship, but it was acceptance, and that was more valuable than gold beyond the wall. The years passed. Mance moved from clan to clan, never staying too long in one place, always moving, always learning. He lived with the cave dwellers in their vast underground cities, learning to navigate by touch in the darkness. He sailed with the raiders from the frozen shore, learning to handle their skin boats in icy waters. He hunted with the great clans that followed the caribou herds, learning to read the migrations to predict where the herds would go. He fought alongside warriors from a dozen different peoples, earning their respect in combat and their trust through shared hardship. And everywhere he went, he listened. He learned the histories of the free folk, the old stories that went back thousands of years, before the wall, before the kingdoms of the south, before the long night itself. He learned their grievances, why they hated the kneelers, why they would rather die free than live as subjects to distant kings. He learned their weaknesses too, their pride, their inability to work together, their habit of feuding with each other even when they faced common threats. But he also learned their strengths, their courage, their resilience, their fierce love of freedom and family and the land itself. They were a hard people, but they were also a genuine people, uncorrupted by the lies and politics of the South. They said what they meant. They honored their word. They lived and died by a code that was brutal but honest. Mance began to see himself not as a deserter, hiding from justice, but as a man who had found his true people. The Watch had never felt like home. Not really. It had been duty and discipline, and the weight of vows he had not understood when he swore them. But here, beyond the wall, living among the free folk, Mance felt something he had not felt since childhood. He felt like he belonged. His reputation grew. People began to speak of him, the crow who had chosen freedom, the man who understood both worlds. Young warriors sought him out to learn his fighting skills. Chiefs asked his advice on strategy and tactics. Women sang songs about him, adapting old ballads to tell his story. He was not yet a leader, not yet someone with real power, but he was becoming known. And in a land where reputation was everything, that mattered. It was during his 5th year beyond the wall that Mance met Dalla. She was the daughter of a clan chief, a woman with dark hair and grey eyes, and a mind as sharp as any Mance had encountered. She was younger than him by several years, but she carried herself with confidence and authority. When she spoke, people listened. When she made decisions, people followed. They met during a gathering of clans, one of the rare occasions when the free folk came together for trade and politics. Mance was there as a guest of Tormund's clan, still building his reputation, still proving himself worthy of respect. Dalla was there representing her father, negotiating trade agreements and marriage alliances with the skill of a southern diplomat. She approached him directly, curious about the former crow who had become a legend. "You are Mance Rayder," she said. "Not a question, a statement." "I am. They say you were a great ranger before you deserted. They say you knew the true north better than any crow. Is that true?" "I knew it well," Mance said carefully, "but not as well as those who were born here. But you chose to leave everything and come here. Why?" It was the question everyone asked, but Dalla asked it differently, not with suspicion or judgment, but with genuine curiosity. She wanted to understand, not to test him. Mance told her the truth about the cloak, about the principle behind it, about the realization that the Night's Watch demanded he deny the humanity of the people they fought against, about the choice he had made to be free rather than live as a prisoner to lies. Dalla listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. That took courage, to give up everything for a principle. Most men would have removed the patch and forgotten about it. "I could not forget," Mance said. "That was the problem." She smiled at that. "No, that was not the problem. That was the solution. You saw the truth and you acted on it. That is rare, even among the free folk." They talked long into the night about the free folk and the kneelers, about the wall and what it represented, about the future and whether the two worlds could ever live in peace. Dalla was intelligent and thoughtful, willing to question her own assumptions, willing to see complexity where others saw only simple answers. Mance found himself drawn to her, not just for her beauty, though she was beautiful, but for her mind and her spirit. They became lovers, and then friends, and then partners. Dalla saw in Mance what few others could see. She saw a man who could bridge two worlds, who understood the kneelers but belonged to the free folk, who had the knowledge and the skill to lead if he chose to lead. She encouraged him, pushed him, challenged him to think bigger than just survival. You could unite them, she said one night as they lay together in her tent. The free folk, you could bring them together. Mance laughed. The free folk cannot be united. They are too proud, too independent. That is what makes them free. That is what makes them weak, Dalla countered. They squabble with each other while the South grows stronger. They waste their strength on feuds and raids instead of preparing for real threats. Someone needs to unite them. Someone who understands them but is not bound by their old hatreds. And you think that someone is me? I think you are the only one who could do it. You have already done what no one thought possible. You have earned the respect of 12 clans. You have proven yourself in battle and in wisdom. And you are not bound by clan loyalty. You can see the big picture. Mance thought about it. The idea was audacious. Insane, even. The free folk had never been united, not in all their long history. They prided themselves on their independence, their refusal to kneel to any king or lord. How could you unite people whose entire identity was built on refusing to be united? But Dalla had planted a seed, and seeds, given time and the right conditions, grow. It was the others that changed everything, the dead things, the creatures from the stories, the legends that most people beyond the wall did not truly believe, until they saw them with their own eyes. They came from the far north, from the lands of always winter, moving slowly, but inexorably south. Clans that ventured too far north disappeared. Entire villages went silent. Rangers who went to investigate never returned, and those who did return brought stories that chilled the blood. Dead men walking, corpses with blue eyes that could not be killed by normal weapons, creatures of ice and cold that killed everything in their path. The others, the White Walkers, the cold gods, they had many names, and they were all names of terror. The free folk began to flee south, not in organized groups, but in panicked flight. Clans abandoned their traditional territories, heading toward the wall, the one barrier that might protect them from what was coming. But the wall was guarded by the Night's Watch, who would not let them pass. And the clans were too scattered, too disorganized to force their way through. They needed a leader, someone who could unite them, organize them, give them a chance of survival. Someone who understood both the free folk and the kneelers, who knew how to fight and how to plan and how to inspire people to follow him even when hope seemed lost. Mance saw what needed to be done, and he saw that Dalla had been right. He was the only one who could do it. So he began the impossible task of uniting the free folk, not through conquest or force, but through persuasion and reputation and the undeniable reality of the threat they all faced. He travelled from clan to clan, speaking to chiefs and warriors, convincing them that their only chance of survival was to work together. Some listened, some refused. But slowly, impossibly, word began to spread. Mance Rayder was gathering an army. The crow who had chosen freedom was becoming the king beyond the wall. It would take years. It would cost him everything he had built, every relationship, every moment of peace. But Mance had made his choice. He would save the free folk, or he would die trying. There was no middle ground. There was no going back. There was only the long, hard road ahead, and the hope that somehow, against all odds, he could give his people a chance to survive what was coming. The dead were coming, and Mance Rayder would be ready for them. The gathering began in the dead of winter, in the year that the free folk would later call the Year of the Crow King. Mance Rayder was 38 years old, and he had spent 6 years beyond. The wall earning the respect and trust of people who trusted no one. Now he had to convince them to do something they had never done before. He had to convince them to unite. The first clan he approached was Tormund's, the old man who'd given him shelter when he was nothing but a desperate deserter. Tormund was greyer now, harder, but he still had the respect of his people. Mance found him in his tent, surrounded by his sons and his warriors, and he told him what was coming. "The dead are moving south," Mance said. "I have spoken to hunters from the far north. They have seen things, whole villages empty, bodies that walk even after they have been killed. The others are real, Tormund. The stories are true, and they are coming for all of us." Tormund listened with a frown. He was old enough to remember the stories, the legends his grandfather had told him about the long night, when the dead walked and the living hid behind walls of ice and fire. But legends were one thing, reality was another. "If what you say is true," Tormund said slowly, "then we are all dead already. The others cannot be fought. That is what the stories say." "The stories also say they were defeated once," Mance countered. 8,000 years ago they were beaten back, which means they can be beaten again. But not if we are scattered. Not if we are divided. We need to come together. All of us. Every clan, every tribe, every group of free folk, from the frozen shore to the Frostfangs. We need to become one people. Tormund laughed at that, a bitter sound. "The free folk will never unite. We are too proud, too stubborn. Every chief thinks he's a king. Every clan thinks it knows better than the others. You might as well try to herd wildcats." "I know," Mance said, "but we have to try, because the alternative is extinction. The dead do not care about our pride or our independence. They will kill us all the same, whether we are united or divided. At least if we are united, we have a chance." "And who would lead this great united host?" Tormund asked. "Who would the free folk follow? No chief will bow to another chief. No warrior will take orders from a man he does not respect." Mance met his eyes. "They will follow me." Tormund stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed again, but this time there was something else in it. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. "You have the confidence of a crow. I will give you that. But confidence is not enough. You will need to prove yourself again and again. To every clan, every warrior, every chief who thinks he knows better." "I know," Mance said. "That is why I am starting with you. If you will not follow me, no one else will. But if you will, others might." Tormund thought about it. He looked at his sons, at his warriors, at the worn faces of people who had survived harsh winters and harsher enemies. Finally, he nodded. "I will follow you, Mance Rayder, not because I think you can win, but because you're the only one mad enough to try." It was a beginning. With Tormund's support, Mance had legitimacy. He had a core group of loyal followers. Now he needed to expand that core, to bring in other clans, other leaders. And that meant travelling the length and breadth of the true north, speaking to people who had no reason to trust him and every reason to reject him. He travelled to the frozen shore, where the raiders lived in skin tents and hunted walrus in the icy waters. Their leader was a woman named Morna, hard as the ice she lived on, scarred from a dozen battles. She listened to Mance's warning about the others and laughed in his face. "We have heard these stories before," she said. "Every generation someone claims the dead are coming, but they never do. It is just fear, just stories told around fires to frighten children." "Then come north with me," Mance said. "Come see for yourself. I will take you to the abandoned villages. I will show you the evidence. And if you still think it is just stories, I will leave and never trouble you again." Morna agreed, curious despite herself. They travelled north together, a small group moving through lands that should have been full of people, but were empty. They found a village that had been thriving just months before, according to the hunters who traded there. Now it was silent. The tents still stood. The fires were cold. And in the centre of the village they found the bodies. They had been dead for weeks, frozen in the snow, but they showed signs of violence, stab wounds, cut throats, but no blood. The bodies had been drained of blood, their skin pale as ice, their eyes missing. And around the village, in the snow, they found tracks. Not human tracks. Something else. Something that walked on two legs but left prints that no living thing could make. Morna stood in the centre of the dead village and looked round, with eyes that had seen death before, but never death like this. "What did this?" she asked quietly. "The others?" Mance said. "The White Walkers, the cold gods, whatever you want to call them. They are real, and they are coming south. Your people are in their path. You can stay here and wait for them to come for you. Or you can join me and fight." Morna looked at him, then at the bodies, then back at him. "If I follow you, my people follow me. We are raiders. We do not kneel. We do not take orders well." "I am not asking you to kneel," Mance said. "I am asking you to survive. Follow me because it is the smart thing to do. Follow me because the alternative is death. But follow me." She did. And with the frozen shore raiders behind him, Mance's reputation grew. Word spread that he was gathering a host, that he had proof the dead were coming, that he might actually be able to unite the free folk. Some came to him willingly. Others had to be convinced. The Thens were different. They had discipline, organization, a leader they called the Magna, who ruled them with absolute authority. They lived in their high valleys, farming and herding, and they had no interest in joining a ragtag army of wildlings. The Magna received Mance in his stone hall and listened to his plea with cold eyes. "Why should the Thens join you?" the Magna asked. "We are safe in our valleys. The dead, if they are real, will not climb to reach us. We have food and shelter and walls. Let the other clans scramble to follow a crow. We will remain here." Mance had expected this. The Thens were proud, isolated, convinced of their superiority over other wildlings. He needed a different approach. "The dead will come for you eventually," he said. "Perhaps not this year or the next. But they will come, and when they do, you will be alone. No allies, no help, just you and your valleys and your walls. Is that enough?" "It has been enough for thousands of years. Against raiders and rival clans, yes, but not against this. I have seen what the others leave behind. Empty villages, dead children, warriors who fought bravely and died anyway. Your walls will not stop them. Your discipline will not save you. You need allies. You need an army. You need me. The Magna was unmoved. Mance realized he would have to try something else. Then let me prove myself, he said. Choose your best warrior. I will fight him. If I win, you join me. If I lose, I leave and never return. The Magna smiled at that, a cold smile. You would fight one of my warriors to the death? To first blood, Mance said. I am not here to kill your people. I am here to save them. The Magna considered it. Then he nodded. Very well. You will fight Styr. He is my best. If you defeat him, the Thenns will follow you. If you lose, you will leave, and we will never speak of this again. Styr was massive, a head taller than Mance, and half again as wide, all muscle and bronze armour. He carried a two-handed sword that looked like it weighed as much as a small child. The Thenns gathered to watch, confident that their champion would crush this upstart crow. But Mance had not survived 6 years beyond the wall by being overconfident. He knew he couldn't match Styr's strength. So he would have to use speed, skill, and cunning. The fight began in the centre of the village, a circle of Thenns watching with cold eyes. Styr came at him like a storm, swinging his massive sword in great arcs that would have cut Mance in half if they had connected. But they did not connect. Mance moved like water, slipping aside, staying just out of reach. He did not try to block or parry. He just moved, conserving his energy, letting Styr tire himself out with those massive swings. The Thenns began to murmur. This was not the kind of fight they were used to. Their warriors stood and traded blows until one fell. But Mance was not standing. He was dancing, circling, waiting for his moment. It came when Styr overextended on a particularly vicious swing. His sword bit into the frozen ground, and for just a moment he was off balance. Mance darted in, his blade flashing, and opened a cut on Styr's arm. Not deep, just enough to draw blood. First blood. The fight was over. Styr stood there, breathing hard, staring at the cut on his arm as if he couldn't believe it had happened. The Thenns were silent. Their champion had been defeated by a crow who fought like a coward, who refused to stand and trade blows like a proper warrior. But the Magna understood. He had seen what Mance had done. He had seen the skill, the discipline, the intelligence. This was not a man who won through strength alone. This was a man who won through cunning. And cunning, the Magna knew, was more valuable than strength when facing an enemy you did not understand. The Thenns will follow you, the Magna said. You have proven yourself worthy. With the Thenns, Mance had gained not just warriors, but legitimacy. The Thenns were respected, feared even by other wildlings. If they followed Mance, others would follow too. And they did. The giants came, the last of their kind, enormous creatures who could break a man with one hand, but who understood that even they could not survive alone. The cave-dwellers came, pale people from underground cities who had seen the dead moving in the darkness. The clans of the haunted forest came, hunters and warriors who had lost family to the others and wanted revenge. But not everyone came willingly. Some chiefs refused, too proud to follow a former crow, too stubborn to admit that the threat was real. Mance gave them chances to change their minds. He showed them evidence. He brought survivors to testify. But when they still refused, he did what he had to do. He fought them. There were a dozen small battles in those years, skirmishes between Mance's growing host and chiefs who thought they could resist. Most of these battles ended quickly, with the resistant chief either yielding or dying. Mance took no pleasure in the killing. Every wildling who died was one less person to face the others. But he could not afford dissent. He could not afford division. The free folk had to be united, even if unity required force. Dalla was with him through it all, his partner and advisor. She handled the politics while he handled the fighting. She negotiated marriages between clans, brokered trade agreements, settled disputes before they became feuds. She was the glue that held the coalition together, the diplomat who could smooth over the rough edges of Mance's blunt leadership. And she was pregnant. They had married in the wildling way, before witnesses, speaking vows that bound them until death. Now she carried his child, a son or daughter, who would be born into a world at war with the dead. Mance worried about that, worried about bringing a child into such darkness. But Dalla was not afraid. "We fight so our children can have a future," she said. "That is what all of this is for. Not for us, for them." The years passed. The host grew. By the time Mance was 42, he commanded an army of nearly 100,000 people. Not all of them were warriors. There were women and children, elderly and infirm, people who could not fight, but who could not be left behind. They brought everything they owned, all their possessions, their animals, their tents. It was not an army in the southern sense. It was a migration. An entire people moving south, fleeing from death, hoping to find safety. But safety lay beyond the wall. And the wall was guarded by the Night's Watch, Mance's former brothers, men who would die before they let a wildling host pass through. Mance knew this. He had been one of them. He knew their training, their tactics, their determination. Breaking through the wall would not be easy. It might not even be possible. But he had to try. Behind him, in the north, the others were coming. He could feel it, a cold pressure on his back, death moving slowly but inevitably south. His people were trapped between the wall and the others, between the men in black who would kill them and the dead things that would kill them worse. He had united the free folk. He had done what no one thought possible. He had become the king beyond the wall, though he had never asked for the title and wore no crown. Now came the hard part. Now came the test that would determine whether all his work, all his struggle, all his sacrifice had been worth it. He had to get his people past the wall. He had to convince the Night's Watch to let them through, or find a way to force them through. He had to save 100,000 people from the approaching darkness. And he had no idea how he was going to do it. But he was Mance Rayder. He had deserted the Night's Watch for a principle. He had survived alone in the wilderness. He had earned the respect of people who respected no one. He had united the free folk when everyone said it was impossible. If anyone could save them, it was him. The host marched south toward the wall, and Mance Rayder rode at its head, the scarlet silk long gone from his cloak, but the memory of it still burning in his heart. He was going to save his people, or die trying. There was no other option. There never had been. The march south was like nothing the North had ever seen. 100,000 free folk moving through the wilderness, a river of humanity flowing toward the wall. They moved slowly, burdened by children and elderly, by possessions and livestock, by everything they owned in the world. Mance rode at the front with his war chiefs, planning each day's march, choosing campsites, sending scouts ahead to find food and water for so many people. It was a logistical nightmare. Keeping that many people fed was nearly impossible. They hunted everything that moved, stripped the forest of game, left the land behind them barren. They ate their pack animals when the hunting failed. They rationed what little grain they had. Children cried from hunger. The elderly fell behind and had to be carried. People died every day from cold or sickness or simple exhaustion, and they had to be left behind because there was no time to bury them properly. But they kept moving, because behind them, always behind them, the cold pressed closer. Scouts returned. It was a reasonable offer, more than reasonable. The gift had been abandoned for generations. It was empty land, good land, that could support tens of thousands of people. The free folk would be a buffer between the wall and the north, additional defenders against whatever came from beyond. And they would be alive, which was better than the alternative. The envoys returned 2 days later. The answer was no. The Lord Commander, a man named Jeor Mormont, had refused even to consider the offer. He did not believe the stories about the others. He thought it was a trick, a ploy to get the wildlings past the wall so they could raid the north. And even if the stories were true, even if the others were real, his duty was clear. No wildlings were to pass the wall, not for any reason, not under any circumstances. The watch existed to keep them out, and keep them out it would. Mance received the news in his tent, surrounded by his war chiefs. Some of them were furious. Tormund wanted to attack immediately, to throw their full strength at Castle Black and tear down the gates. The Magna of the Thenns argued for strategy, for attacking multiple castles at once to divide the Watch's forces. The Lord of Bones, a vicious raider who had joined Mance's host grudgingly, argued for terror, for killing every crow they captured and mounting their heads on spikes as a warning. Mance listened to them all and made his decision. They would attack Castle Black, but not to destroy it. They would probe its defences, test its strength, look for weaknesses. And while they did that, he would look for another way. There had to be another way. He refused to believe that slaughtering the Night's Watch was the only option. The attacks began the next week. Small raids at first, wildling warriors testing the Watch's response, firing arrows at the wall, attempting to climb the ice under cover of darkness. The Watch repelled them easily. The wall was 700 feet of solid ice, and the brothers defending it were skilled and determined. Wildlings fell by the dozens, shot by arrows, or pushed from the wall to die on the frozen ground below. But Mance kept the pressure on. Not because he thought the attacks would succeed, but because he needed to keep the Watch focused on Castle Black. While they were defending one position, he could explore other options. He sent scouts east and west, looking for undefended sections of the wall, places where they might cross without fighting. He sent climbers up the wall at night, looking for routes that could be used by large numbers of people. And he sent a team to find the Horn of Winter. The Horn of Winter was a legend, a myth from the Age of Heroes. It was said to be a great horn that could bring down the wall itself if blown by the right person. Most people thought it was just a story, a tale told around fires to entertain children. But Mance had learned over the years that many legends had a kernel of truth, and if there was even a chance that the horn existed, he had to find it. the searchers went into the Frostfangs, following old stories and older maps, looking for the graves of the ancient kings who might have been buried with such a treasure. Weeks passed. The host waited at the base of the wall, growing hungrier, growing colder, watching the skies for signs of the approaching winter. Dalla's time came, and she gave birth in a tent behind the lines, attended by wieldly midwives who had delivered 100 children in worse conditions. It was a boy. Mance held his son for the first time, and felt a surge of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. This child, this small, helpless thing, represented everything he was fighting for. A future, a chance, a reason to keep going even when hope seemed lost. But he could not stay with Dalla and the baby. He had a host to command, a war to fight, a people to save. He kissed Dalla's forehead, promised he would return, and went back to the siege. The searchers returned with disappointing news. They had found no Horn of Winter. If it existed, it was hidden beyond their ability to find it. Or perhaps it had never existed at all. Perhaps it was just a story. Nothing more. Mance had been counting on the Horn. Without it, his options were limited. He couldn't negotiate with the Watch. He could not find an undefended route around the wall. And his direct attacks were failing, costing lives, without achieving results. He was running out of time, running out of food, running out of options. And behind him, always behind him, the others were coming closer. His scouts reported that the dead were now less than a week's march behind them. The free folk were trapped, pressed between the wall and the approaching darkness. Some of the chiefs began to panic, demanding that Mance order a full assault on Castle Black, throwing everything they had at the wall in one desperate attempt to break through. Others argued for retreat, for going east or west, for splitting up and trying to survive in smaller groups. Mance stood on a rise overlooking his host, looking at the sea of tents and fires, the countless people who had put their faith in him. 100,000 souls, give or take, all depending on him to save them. And he had no idea how. Dalla found him there, the baby wrapped in furs and held against her chest. She stood beside him in silence for a moment, looking out at the same view. Then she said quietly, "You cannot save them all. I have to try, I know. But you need to accept that some will die, maybe many. You have done everything you could. You united them. You brought them this far. If you fail now, it will not be because you did not try hard enough. It will be because the task was impossible. I cannot accept that." "Then you are a fool," Dalla said, but there was love in her voice, not cruelty. A noble fool, but a fool nonetheless. The world doesn't care about our intentions, Mance. It does not reward effort or determination. It simply is. And sometimes, no matter how hard we fight, we lose. Mance looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in Dalla's arms, unaware of the danger surrounding them. He thought about all the other children in the host, all the innocent lives that would be lost if he failed. He thought about the free folk, the proud, stubborn, fierce people he had come to love. He thought about the Night's Watch, his former brothers, doing their duty even though they did not understand the true threat. And he thought about himself, a deserter, a traitor to his vows, a man who had thrown away everything for a principle, for the belief that people should not be judged by which side of a wall they were born on. Had it been worth it? Had any of it been worth it? He did not know. But he knew he could not give up, not while his people still breathed, not while there was still a chance, however small, that he could save them. "I will find a way," he said. "I have to." Dalla kissed his cheek. "Then find it quickly, because we do not have much time." She was right. The attacks on the wall continued, but they were desperate now, frantic. Wildlings threw themselves at the ice, climbing with ropes and hooks, trying to find a purchase on the slick surface. Most fell. Some made it to the top, only to be cut down by the defenders. A few, a very few, made it over the wall and disappeared into the lands beyond. But not enough, never enough. Mance tried everything. He sent raiders to attack other castles, trying to divide the Watch's forces. He sent spies to Castle Black, trying to find weaknesses in the defences. He even considered a frontal assault with his giants, massive creatures who might be able to break down the gates if given the chance. But all of these plans had the same problem. They required killing his former brothers, and the more brothers he killed, the fewer there would be to defend against the others once his people were through. It was a trap with no good escape. Every choice led to death. Every path led to failure. Mance felt the weight of it crushing him, the impossible responsibility of leading so many people toward an uncertain fate. And then, just when he thought all hope was lost, opportunity arrived in an unexpected form. A crow came to his camp, not an emissary, not a deserter, a spy. A young man who claimed to be a ranger of the Night's Watch, who'd been sent beyond the wall to infiltrate Mance's host and learn his plans. The spy's name was Jon Snow. He was Ned Stark's bastard, a green boy who barely knew how to hold a sword. Qhorin Halfhand had sent him, ordering him to join the wildlings, to prove his loyalty by killing Qhorin himself. It was a desperate ploy, a final gambit by the legendary ranger to give the Watch intelligence on Mance's forces. Mance saw through it immediately. He had known Qhorin. He understood the old ranger's mind. This boy was a spy, no question about it. But he was also an opportunity. If Mance could turn him, if he could convince Jon Snow that the free folk were not the enemy, that the real threat was the others, then perhaps he could send a message to the Night's Watch that they would actually believe. So Mance let Jon Snow live. He brought him into his tent. He talked to him, not as an enemy, but as a fellow brother of the Watch, someone who understood the burden of the Black. He told Jon about his desertion, about the Scarlet Cloak, about the choice he had made to be free, rather than live as a prisoner to lies. And he saw something in Jon Snow's eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. This boy was young, idealistic, full of the same rigid sense of duty that Mance had once possessed. But he was also intelligent, thoughtful, capable of questioning his assumptions. Given time, given the right experiences, he might come to see what Mance had seen. That the world was more complicated than black and white, crows and wildlings, civilized and savage. But time was the one thing Mance did not have. The others were coming. In the distance, to the north, the sky had taken on a strange quality, a pale luminescence that spoke of unnatural cold. The temperature was dropping, even in the middle of summer. Snowstorms came without warning, fierce and sudden, carrying a chill that cut through the thickest firs. Animals fled south in panic. Birds disappeared from the sky. The free folk could feel it. They knew death was approaching. The camp grew restless, fearful. Fights broke out over food, over space, over nothing. Some of the chiefs began to talk about abandoning the siege, about retreating into the deep wild and taking their chances alone. The unity Mance had worked so hard to build was fracturing under the pressure. Mance called a council of his war chiefs in his tent. They came reluctantly, their faces grim. He looked around at them, these fierce warriors who had followed him this far, and he told them the truth. "We are running out of time," he said. "The others will be here within days, maybe less. We cannot retreat. We cannot go around. We have only one option left. We attack the wall with everything we have. All of us, all at once. We throw our entire strength at Castle Black, and we break through, or we die trying." "That is suicide," the Magna of Then said flatly. "The wall cannot be taken by assault. We will lose thousands, tens of thousands." "I know," Mance said, "but it is the only chance we have. If we wait, the others will come and we will all die. If we scatter, we will be picked off one by one. This is our only option. We attack together, and we pray to whatever gods will listen that it is enough." Tormund stood up, his face set with determination. "Then we attack. Better to die fighting than to die running. Better to die as men than to become those things. I will follow you, Mance Rayder, to the end." One by one, the other chiefs nodded their agreement. They knew the odds. They knew most of them would probably die. But they also knew that Mance had brought them this far, that he had never lied to them, that he had done everything in his power to save them. If he said this was their only chance, they believed him. The attack was planned for the next dawn. Every able-bodied warrior would assault the wall. The giants would use mammoths to try to break down the gates. Climbers would scale the ice from 12 different points. Archers would provide covering fire. It would be chaos, brutal and bloody. But it might work. If they could overwhelm the defenders, if they could get enough people over the wall or through the gates, they might be able to create a breach large enough for the rest to follow. Mance knew the cost. Thousands would die, maybe tens of thousands. But if it worked, if they broke through, the survivors would have a chance. And a chance was better than certain death. He spent the night before the attack with Dalla and their son. He held the baby, memorizing his face, his smell, the weight of him in his arms. He might not survive the battle. He would be in the front lines, leading his people, and leaders were always targets. But if he died, at least he would die knowing he had done everything he could. "Promise me something," Dalla said quietly. "If you die, promise me you will not become one of those things. Promise me you will find a way to rest in peace." "I promise," Mance said. "Burn my body if I fall. Do not let them take me." "I will." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the camp outside, 100,000 people preparing for the battle that would decide their fate. Somewhere out there, Jon Snow was watching, learning, trying to understand. Somewhere south of the wall, the Night's Watch was preparing its defences, grimly determined to do their duty. And somewhere to the north, the others were coming. Death on 2 legs, the cold made flesh. Dawn came grey and cold. Mance Rayder stood before his host, looking out at the sea of faces, all the people who had put their faith in him. He raised his voice so they could all hear him. Words carried on the wind, words that would be remembered for generations. "Today we fight," he called out. "Not for glory, not for conquest, not for gold or honor or any of the things that Southerners fight for. We fight for something more important. We fight for the right to live. We fight for our children. We fight for each other. The crows think we are savages. They think we are criminals, but they are wrong. We are the free folk. We bow to no king. We kneel to no lord. We live by our own laws and our own choices. And today we choose to survive. A roar went up from the host. 100,000 voices raised in defiance. Mance drew his sword, the steel catching the pale morning light, and pointed it at the wall. "Follow me," he shouted, "and let them see what the free folk can do when we stand together." The host surged forward, a wave of humanity crashing toward the wall. The battle had begun, and Mance Rayder, the deserter who had become a king, rode at their head, leading his people toward whatever fate awaited them on the other side. He had done everything he could. He had united the free folk. He had led them south. He had given them a chance. Now it was up to them and to the gods, and to whatever luck or fate or destiny governed the world. The king beyond the wall charged toward the wall, his horns sounding across the battlefield, his people at his back, death behind him and death ahead of him, and only the thin hope of survival somewhere in between. This was his story. This was his choice. And whatever came next, he would face it as he had faced everything else. Free.